So thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Chad Hafley, the Vice Chair of the Technology and Trends Roundtable for NCLA. This is our first of the year in a series of what's going to be, I don't want to say monthly, but every other month, regular series of webinars, we'll say. Our next one is tentatively scheduled for March, where Kate Hill is going to walk us through some tips and tricks for using Summon, now that everyone in the state, I believe, has access to it. But for today, we are here and lucky to have Noah Lenstra with us to talk about reconceptualizing reference as tech support. Noah is an assistant professor of library and information studies at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. His research focuses on how libraries and archives adapt to reflect the evolving needs of the communities they serve. His research has been published in, among others, Library Quarterly, Evidence-Based Library and Information Practice, Journal of Library Administration, First Monday, and Public Library Quarterly. He's a reviewer for Library High Tech and Reference and User Services Quarterly, and you can find more information on his work at noahlenstra.com. So again, I'll be sitting here in the background watching for any questions and making sure they get flagged for the end. And without much more ado, I'll turn it over to you, Noah.
Great, thanks, Chad. And I'm looking forward to talking with you all for about an hour. And I'm going to try to make this pretty lively. And if you have any questions or comments or thoughts at any point, just go ahead and put it in the chat. It's not disruptive at all to me, so I'd encourage you to just kind of type whatever you're thinking as it comes to you, rather than waiting towards the end. So we don't have a ton of people in the group, so the upside of that is that we can hopefully get a good discussion going. But as Chad said, I'm a faculty member at UNCG. I've been in North Carolina for about a year and a half after completing my PhD at the School of Library and Information Science at the University of Illinois. And this logo that you're seeing here on my title slide, that was actually something that I developed with my advisor, Kate Williams at Illinois, to kind of talk about a trend that we had been seeing in libraries for librarians and public librarians in particular to be asked increasingly to be help people use technology that they may bring to the library. And that kind of observation led to this work on reconceptualizing reference and information services as tech support. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means and give some examples, as well as talk about what are some of the obstacles to actually implementing this based on some of the research that I've done in public libraries. So yeah, so I'll just to reiterate, I'll say a little bit about the work that I've done, and I'll spend quite a bit of time talking about some of the ways that librarians avoid providing tech support, which was kind of something that as I did my study, I kept seeing over and over again. There's lots of ways that librarians, I think, avoid providing tech support, and so I think there's quite a bit of work to be done in terms of providing librarians with the tools, conceptual and practical, that they need to integrate tech support into their daily work, especially in public libraries. And that'll lead to my kind of recommendations for things to be done, and then we'll just end with an interactive Q&A. So yeah, so here am I again. So here's a picture of me. And I didn't mention, but I'm also an affiliated faculty in the gerontology department here at UNCG. And a lot of my work has to do with older adults who, of course, as we all know, are going to become an increasingly large sector of society as we move forward, with the U.S. Census Bureau estimating that the population of the U.S. aged 0 to 18 will be about on par with the population 65 and older, and not that far into the future. And this is really important because we've found that even as tech adoption among older adults continues to rise, simply the adoption of technology by older adults does not necessarily lead to digital literacy. And so the latest research from the Pew Internet and American Life Project, results that were published last year in the fall, indicate that about 75% of Americans age 65 and older say that when they get a new electronic device, they usually need someone else to help them set it up or show them how to use it. So we know older adults are using technology, but they frequently need someone to help them with it. And this trend is most pronounced among older adults, but you'll see as you look through it, even if you look at 18 to 29-year-olds, 17% of 18 to 29-year-olds also agree with the statement that they need someone to help them if they're given a new technology. So I think this need for tech support is across the board, but it's most pronounced among the older sectors of society. And this has led to things like the Chicago Public Library Cyber Navigator program, which is a program to embed tech support throughout the library system. And I'll say a little bit more about how that program operates in a minute, as well as some of its limitations. Let's take a step back, and so let's just start with a classical definition of reference, and so what reference librarians are supposed to be doing. So just to bring you back to your LIS degree program, so a reference interview is defined as a purposive conversation between a librarian and the user, in which the librarian tries to clarify what it is the user wants to know, and then to link the user to the information system so that they can find out what it is they're trying to do. And I actually think that this definition encapsulates tech support in a quite nice way. In particular, if we define the information system as including the entirety of digital information, so if to access information you have to be able to use technology, then of course providing tech support would fit within the reference interview. Secondarily, if what the user wants to know is how to use a new technology or a piece of software, an app, then tech support becomes part of the reference transaction. And to give one example that I saw over and over again in my research was someone will come to the library and they want some help figuring out how to transfer photos from their phone to a laptop and then organize them. And so yeah, so this is my question: how can we make tech support a normal and expected part of the work of reference and information service librarians? Why isn't it a normal part currently, and what can we do to normalize it and make it more expected? So how I've kind of looked at this question is through field work in public libraries in another institution like senior centers. And so these are just pictures, some of the pictures that I took during my dissertation research. The picture at the top is some of the older adults that I worked with, as well as staff from public libraries that participated in the study, and just some other pictures of working with older adults throughout the research process. And so what I really found, so I should say, just to back up, so part of the study involved spending, I can't even remember how many hours, hundreds of hours as kind of an ethnographer in public library reference and information service desks. And one of the things that I found spending all this time at the desk and libraries is that a lot of the staff, in fact, most of the staff, was really resistant to providing tech support. And there's lots of ways that this resistance kind of manifested itself. So one way that it manifests is to restrict tech support to volunteers or to specialized staff who are not always available. And a great example of that is the Cyber Navigator program at Chicago Public Library that I mentioned a minute ago, where the library, to its credit, hired these paraprofessionals, most of whom were fresh out of undergraduate, to kind of work at the library on a part-time basis to provide patrons with internet and tech support. But the kind of the downside of the program was that it enabled the normal librarians to basically say, well, we have cyber navigators here, so we don't need to provide any tech support ourselves. That's why we have these part-time paraprofessionals in the building to do the work that we don't want to do. Another way is to refuse to see tech support as core to the work of the librarian. And so this is just in one of my interviews, this is one of the adult services librarians told me, this isn't why I went to library school. So I think, especially in public libraries, we still butt up against the idea that being a librarian is synonymous with being the keeper of the books. And so there's still a lot of work to be done to kind of normalize the expectation of working with patrons around technology issues in libraries. And yeah, so kind of ancillary to that is the idea that I saw staff at the desk kind of bury themselves in books. And so at all the libraries where I worked, I kept seeing librarians would wheel kind of book carts to the reference desk, and they'd spend their time at the desk kind of putting stickers on books or taking stickers off books or kind of just fiddling around with books. And I think part of that had to do with wanting to maintain this image of the librarian as kind of the keeper of the books, and seeing technology as really ancillary to what the library was all about. And then another obstacle was refusing to move around the library to help people with tech. When I was thinking about how to conceptualize this, I really draw on the work of some librarians in Douglas County, Colorado, and they call this Fort Ref, and the idea of leaving Fort Ref. Yeah, and that's a great point. I see a chat coming in. So this isn't why I went to library school, the reflection of when they went to library school. And I think that's a great point. And I do think to a certain extent that there is some generational issues that need to be addressed, and some continuing professional development that could be done to help with the situation. And I'll get to that at the end of my talk. But yeah, I also see kind of some of the work in embedded librarianship and roving reference being part of the solution, because if someone, especially if they're using a library computer, it's pretty cumbersome for them to have to go to the reference desk, ask for help, and then to encounter a librarian who's refused to go back with them to the computer. It really hinders the process. And then this was something that was really unexpected, and I'm going to spend just a minute talking about. But one of the things that I heard over and over again was this refusal for librarians to actually touch the devices of patrons. And two of the libraries that I worked in, it was actually a formalized policy. And I'd be interested in hearing from you all if you have similar policies at your libraries. But there was it was actually the formal policy at two of the libraries that I studied for librarians were prohibited from in any way directly interacting with a patron's device out of fear of liability. So the fear was that if a librarian touched a patron's device, and then, I don't know, whatever happened, the device stopped working, or somehow it broke, that the patron would then hold the library and the librarian liable for any malfunction that happened with the device. And I don't know if that's, I don't know if you have similar policies at your library. Yeah, it's definitely, there's a privacy concern as well about a librarian. But these are some of the concerns. But this concern, although it came from kind of a well-meaning place of wanting to protect the library and possibly also wanting to protect patron privacy, it really had the negative consequence of really hindering what type of tech support librarians would or could do. And I heard multiple times when I was doing my observations, someone would come to a librarian, ask for tech support, and the librarian would the tech support would be extremely limited because the librarian couldn't touch the device that the patron was using. Yeah, Julie, I really appreciate that point, and I'm really pleased to hear that you're so hands-on at High Point. And yeah, there is a lot of liability arguments, but I agree with you. I've never heard of any actual case where something happened on a patron's device, and the patron then held the library liable. So I think it's, I really think it's kind of a misplaced fear that's really kind of standing in the way, and in some way that also relates to the confidence of the librarians in terms of dealing with technology, which is a point I'll come to in just a minute. And so, yeah, so this kind of goes back to why I think it's important to reconceptualize reference as tech support. And another thing that I saw was that in some places librarians would refuse to engage in tech support when they themselves were not an expert on whatever technological question a patron was asking about. And to really kind of illustrate, I think, kind of how misplaced that perspective is, consider kind of this classical reference transaction. So a patron comes to a reference librarian and they ask, what is the capital town of the nation of Malawi? And imagine if the librarian were to say, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I'm not an expert on Malawi. And so this is kind of, and I think, of course, everyone here would recognize that this is a ridiculous interaction. Librarians don't have to be experts on every single question that's brought to them, and in fact what we're good at and what we should be good at is kind of troubleshooting and working on questions in which we're expected to move beyond our areas of expertise. And so, but what I was finding was that over and over again librarians were kind of refusing to engage and working with patrons around technologies with which they were unfamiliar. And just another thing that I saw happen was there wasn't much advertising, and in fact I think if there was tech support being offered, it was kind of something that was kept hidden and not promoted. I really learned this when I spent some time working with the senior centers in the town where I did my study. When I talked with the seniors and I asked them, did you know that you can get tech support over at the libraries? They were just totally blown away. They had never heard of this. It never crossed their mind. And I found out that the librarians weren't doing any outreach at the senior center. So it's it's kind of if you're not getting out there and letting your community know that you provide this service, they're not going to magically realize that it exists. So I certainly agree that we want the library to be seen as the community's help desk, as Lisa points out, but we have to get out there to let that be known and not keep it under the bushel, so to speak. And then just a couple more things that I saw happen was restricting tech support to particular times. So this is just an example from a library in Ohio that offers free one-on-one computer training, but patrons are limited to one session per month, and you have to sign up in advance. So kind of making patrons jump through those hoops just kind of really blocks the amount of tech support that you're able to provide. And then also just restricting tech support to library-owned tech. So I saw a lot of this where a librarian may be willing to help someone use an e-reader service that the library purchases, such as Hoopla or Overdrive or something like that, but they're really not willing to help someone if they're trying to, say, figure out how to sign up for the Affordable Care Act or something like that. And then finally, just shuffling people around. So I saw a lot of this when I was doing my observations. Lots of librarians telling people that they need to come back at a different time. They need to go to a different place. They need to wait until someone else comes back. So as opposed to just providing patrons with whatever they need on the spot, making them kind of shuffle around the library and shuffle through time. Okay, so this is kind of a kind of negative portrayal, and I wanna just say that it wasn't all negative. I did see some staff really kind of go the extra mile to help patrons with technology, and so it wasn't kind of universally negative. But I'm focusing here on kind of some of the obstacles that I saw to providing tech support in libraries as a way to jumpstart a discussion about how reconceptualizing reference as tech support would be a helpful intervention to address this situation. And I think although librarians are always interested in practical matters and very hands-on thing, I think there's a reason why it's important to think about concepts and theory here, and to really think about what does it mean to support patrons' engagement with information systems in the 21st century, in which, of course, the vast majority are going to be digital information systems. The books are not going to go away, but in terms of providing reference support outside of reader's advisory, it's more likely than not going to be very much technologically focused. And I'm just seeing a lot of great comments in the chat box, and appreciate everyone sharing their experiences. Yeah, and I like what Lisa's saying here about providing support to people in all forms whenever the library is open, but also giving them the option to schedule an appointment if they have something more intensive that they may want to work on. And I'm just going to now kind of shift a minute to talk a little bit about some practical steps that I think we as a profession could take to enable more and more of our members to see tech support as an integral part of the work of the librarian. And so I think, and this is something I'm obviously working on in my work, is to think about how to embed tech support into reference information services training at the master's level. And so this is just a picture of some of the things that I've done in the past, bringing students into, in this case, this is a picture of a senior center, but I brought students into the senior center, and they have this kind of experiential learning where they're actually having the experience of sitting down with a senior citizen and helping them with whatever they're learning to do with technology. And so having that experiential learning is kind of a part of their master's education. Of course, there's lots of opportunities for continuing professional development as well. And this is something not from library information science, but actually from a school of education in Iceland. But the main idea here is this idea of over-the-shoulder learning. And so if that's something you've never heard of before, I'd encourage you to just do a Google search for over-the-shoulder learning. And it's a really powerful way, I think, to teach and learn technology, where you're kind of, to go back to the image with which I started this presentation, you're kind of you're kind of working with whoever is learning the technology and kind of helping guide them, and it's something that I think could be done kind of very easily at any professional conference. Just have a workshop, have an hour, and pair people up, and have one member of the pair kind of show something new that they recently learned how to do on their smartphone, and try to show the other member of the pair how to do it, and just kind of having these over-the-shoulder learning experiences be part of the continuing professional development of librarians, and try to do it in kind of a very, there's no right or wrong answer, but I think if we get some of the older generations, perhaps of the profession, who may not have had this type of education when they were going through a master's program, kind of exposing them to it. And I want to make sure that I'm clear. I think this type of service is something that a librarian of any age could provide. And in fact, I was talking about the Cyber Navigator program, and one of the best Cyber Navigators was actually a retired lawyer. So he was someone who himself was an older adult, but he had been kind of a techie his entire life. So in his retirement, he was actually coming back to the library and volunteering to help people with technology. So I think anyone of any age can kind of help someone else use technology and provide tech support. I'm just kind of catching up here on the chat. Lots of great things coming in. Yeah, and I like what Julie is saying about looking at other website tutorials, YouTube, Facebook, doing text support. Yeah, and I'll be interested in hearing more about some of the things that you all are doing. I just want to share one last thing before we get to the Q&A. And that is kind of some new positions that I'm now seeing appear in my research. And so this is probably one of the positions I was most enthusiastic about it. In Red Deer, Alberta, Canada, they recently were hiring for a digital literacy manager for the library. And I thought this was such a great idea. So this digital literacy manager, they were primarily responsible with working with staff throughout the system to kind of ensure that everyone throughout the library system kind of felt comfortable providing tech support. And they did some hands-on training themselves, but it was more of a managerial role. It was more of, kind of as it says here, developing and delivering digital literacy and emerging tech training programs for library staff, board members, and volunteers. So I thought this was such a fascinating position to see a library hiring for. So this is kind of, they were hiring someone to kind of do the behind the scenes training to ensure that the entire staff is ready to then go out and work with the public around whatever tech support needs that they may be facing. So I'm hoping that we'll see more and more of those types of positions appear in public libraries throughout North America and beyond, but just wanted to share that with you as kind of a really fascinating step that you may consider taking if you're in a position to play a role in shaping new hires at your system. And so that's what I have. That's my spiel, and I'm gonna stop talking for a minute, catch up on the chat. But I'd love to hear any thoughts that you have, any questions, any recommendations. Yeah, so I'm gonna stop talking now and take a look at the chat.
Thanks, Noah. That was really interesting and really provoking. Yeah, there's been some good discussion in the chat. If anyone has other examples of how you've worked this into your work or you've seen it elsewhere, I think we'd all love to hear it. It sounds like, as much as you can tell from the text anyway, a lot of head nodding and agreement that this is a way that libraries should be going. And interestingly, I think seems to cut across public libraries, academic libraries, pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, yeah, and one question I'd be really interested in knowing for academic librarians. So I don't do a ton of research in academic libraries, but I know here at UNCG we have access to Fix Tech, which is kind of a dedicated tech support hotline that you can call to kind of get tech support. So if you're on a campus that has kind of an IT system, do you find that kind of fills the need, or does that kind of still leave you as an academic librarian with a lot of work to do? Oh, Amanda, that's great. So you have your IT help desk next to the reference desk. I think that's so smart. I really like that. So you have kind of your student tech services, but it's kind of in the library, and if they're especially busy, the librarians jump in. That's great.
We have a similar setup at UNC Chapel Hill in our undergraduate library. The IT support desk is downstairs, but they view their role very much as does the computer turn on and does the software work? It's less about instruction, so I think that still falls less to the
Yeah.
reference desk quite a bit.
Sure, sure. And that makes sense. And that's kind of similar to what I was seeing in public libraries, where librarians will kind of support the library's technology or library systems, but there can be sometimes reluctance to go beyond supporting what the library owns or has purchased in terms of technology.
Oh yes, I see Amanda mentioned wireless setup questions.
Yeah.
I think that's a universal.
And I like this discussion. I think Julie brought it up, and then there was another comment related to it about kind of steering the patron as well as coworkers to training programs that are available. And so, yeah, they're free and easy to use. But then I think Lisa said that a problem is kind of getting people who may be resistant to providing tech support to actually sign up and take these classes. And so I'd be really interested to know, and it sounds like from the chat, some of you have had experiences with coworkers who may not see the importance of librarians providing tech support. So I'd love if anyone has had any experiences with that, and anything that you found works well in terms of getting your staff on the same page in relation to this question of providing tech support as an integral role of the librarian. And while you're thinking about that, I would say one other thing, I don't have a slide on this, but another practical step that I've found works really well when you're working with patrons is to kind of model how to troubleshoot a problem. And so I basically, I mean, I'm sure like many of you, if I'm kind of trying to figure out on the fly how something works, I mean, I'm Googling, I'm trying to type into my search bar exactly what's happening, looking on forums to try to figure it out. And as I'm doing that, troubleshooting, I'm kind of talking out loud about what I'm doing, hopefully trying to model the behavior that you have to go through if you're trying to troubleshoot something with which you're unfamiliar.
I think that's really important, and it gets back to the heart of what is a reference interview and how do you walk someone through it, teaching versus doing it for them. I used to feel with tech support questions an intense pressure to just know the answer right away. So I would tend to like go do the research behind the scenes and then get back to someone when I had the answer for them. And now I try to do more of the show them the process, like you mentioned, how to Google an error message and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chad. And yeah, I think kind of that modeling and showing rather than telling is really important, and that's really what builds up kind of digital literacy skills and information literacy for that matter.
And I see some good points coming up about establishing a common baseline comfort level with technology among staff, and that's probably a key role of the organization to play.
Yeah, yeah, and I like Julie's saying about kind of having this training internal to the library to ensure that there's a baseline understanding of how to access ebooks, e-audio, and how to go about finding what may be available, and then having other staff who may be the kind of dedicated people who are also available. Yeah, so Megan, this is an interesting point. So Megan is talking about as an academic special collections librarian doing tech support over the phone with a scholar using the catalog. And I actually saw this come up in my research. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that uncommon, especially but not exclusively, for older adults to kind of call the public library reference desk and ask for them to kind of walk them through something that they were trying to do on the computer. And yeah, so if you're trying to do tech support over the phone, it's incredibly, yeah, it's the hardest, exactly. And I'd be really interested in, I know some of you mentioned texting. Yeah, and that's exactly, Lisa just asked a question that I was going to ask. Have any of you tried doing screen sharing? And of course, it's difficult if the person you're talking to doesn't feel comfortable or doesn't feel capable kind of engaging in screen sharing. But if you had the right application, I think screen sharing could help a lot in certain instances.
I would be particularly interested in a way of screen sharing that assumes little to no technical barrier on the other person involved in the screen
Yeah,
sharing.
exactly. I mean, I think that's the hurdle. I mean, screen sharing, at least the screen sharing applications that I'm familiar with right now, they're not very friendly to people who are novices. And so I think if someone is kind of comfortable using technology, it may work well. But I personally am not familiar with a really kind of novice-friendly screen sharing app. But if anyone knows of one, I'd love to hear about it. Oh yeah, so that's a great point too, Amanda, that if you're doing screen share, there's also connectivity issues. If someone's kind of in a rural environment where you can't expect them to have a solid internet connection.
I've also heard stories, and I can't think of exactly where, of libraries that do kind of one-way screen sharing. So they might quickly do a screencast of how to accomplish something and send someone a link to it. So then
Yeah.
they don't have to set anything up beyond clicking on a link, and then also have it to refer to later if they need it.
Yeah, Chad, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, I think that could work quite well, especially if you're using Camtasia and screencasting things like that. Just make a quick video and kind of send it out in kind of a format that would be easy for a patron to stream on the device without having to download or kind of launch any application. Maybe a private YouTube link or something like that. Yeah, and emailing screenshots back and forth. Yeah, these are really great points. I should have done this earlier, but I'd love to. I'm seeing lots of names that are unfamiliar to me. Being someone relatively new to North Carolina, I know it seems kind of silly to do this towards the end of the webinar, but if you don't mind, I'd love to. If you don't mind, just telling me kind of who you are, where you're at, what institution you're working in. Bye, Ian. Thanks for the kind words.
And if you're having
Oh
trouble,
yeah, hi Amanda. Yeah, I do remember you now from the NCLA booth. Yeah, great to see you again, Amanda.
and again, if you're having trouble finding the chat, there's a little purple arrow thing in the bottom right corner that'll pop it out.
Great. A couple people from UNC Chapel Hill, Henderson County Public Library, Pennsylvania County Library in Brevard, Jane at Gaston County. High Point Public Library, Forsyth County. Yeah, great, great. I'm glad that you're all here and able to make it. And I may have met some of you at NCLA, but I'm not the best at names, so sometimes I'll see a name and it's hard for me to pin it to a face. But yeah, so let me, if there's a low right here, I want to kind of, especially for those of you working in public libraries, but possibly for the academic librarians as well. What do you think about this position that the Red Deer Public Library is? Well, they filled it now, but would someone kind of having this sort of role kind of help? Help your library system provide more tech support? Or what would be some of the obstacles to kind of having this type of librarian in your system? Because I really think that's part of the equation. It's kind of changing staffing models in libraries, and kind of in part it's the changing roles of reference and information services librarians. But I think there's also a larger question about how staff time is allocated and what staff are expected to be doing. Oh, Julie, that's great. Yeah, I'm so pleased that that's what you're already doing down at High Point. Yeah. So Susan, definitely, the administration needs to see the need, and there has to be an allocation. And I know in some places, in fact, in most places, there's never enough staff to do everything that needs to be done, which of course is the perennial issue in libraries. There's always so much work to be done, and there's limited personnel to take care of it all. But yeah, and thanks for your response to that, and also I just love to, if anyone's interested, I just kind of I'll put a seed or I'll plant a seed. NCLA 2019. Let's try to have a workshop on providing tech support in libraries and really do something that would be practical and hands-on and getting people the experiential learning that they need to feel more comfortable providing tech support on a technology or device that's unfamiliar to them.
And I think we've got a pretty good home for that to be self-serving for a minute in the Technology and Trends Roundtable. So if you're not a member, you can join for a mere $5 a year and kind of steer the discussion. We'll probably be doing a lot of that between now and 2019 and beyond. We've got about 10 minutes left. Do you have any final questions or no discussion points you wanted to bring up?
Yeah. Well, I really like what Susan says here. Susan, this is a great point. So Susan says that tech questions can also involve untold amounts of time. So trying to help someone can mean who knows how long it will take. And I think that's such a great point. And I actually think that that's one of the reasons why librarians can sometimes be resistant to providing tech support. Because it can seem like just an enormous time sink. And as we all know, and I'm sure I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but once you get started kind of doing tech support, it can kind of be incredibly time intensive. I mean, you may sit down and half an hour may pass and you're still trying to get them set up with whatever it is they're trying to do. And so I think, yeah, falling down the rabbit hole. And I don't know if I have the best solution to that problem. But I think, I mean, one thing that I found worked, and it sounds a little bit similar to the appointment model that I think Julie may have mentioned, but I'm not sure. But this idea that you kind of upfront tell the patron, I'd be happy to help you with this question or issue for a little bit, and just make it clear from the get-go that you're at the desk, and so let's try to work on this for a little bit, and hopefully I may be able to give you a little bit of guidance in terms of how to do some DIY tech support of your own through kind of modeling how to search. But just kind of make it clear kind of where the boundaries are, and if it's clear that this is going to be something that's going to take an hour or whatever, let them know that there's maybe they can sign up for one of those appointments. But yeah, I think sometimes it's a question of yeah, kind of setting boundaries and kind of letting patrons know what you can do and what you can't do, and kind of not just totally brushing off the entire interaction, but at least giving them a little bit to get started. Let's see. Yeah, so Susan, how do you convince the administration of this important need, especially when they allocate? So yeah, that's a very, very tricky question. I'm not sure if I have the best answer to that, but one thing that I found is to use some of the statistics from things like the Pew Internet and American Life that show that this is kind of a continuing need. Even young people, even the so-called digital natives, frequently need help when they're using technology that's new to them, and we have the data to kind of show that. So this is a need. And if libraries more and more kind of are charged with supporting digital learning, it's a need that if we're not addressing, it's probably not going to get met. And so I think that argument and kind of having some statistics from bodies like Pew can help to make the case. Yeah, and definitely kind of also, as Julie says, keeping track of the questions that you get. And so it could also be if you're tracking reference interactions, you may want to include on your reference transaction tracking sheet or software, whatever you're using, just a checkbox to indicate if it was a tech support question.
And I think there's enough interest in this. Who knows? Maybe we might be able to expand another webinar in our series.
Yeah, lynda.com, and similar to Amanda, like, I mean, I have to say that for me, I rely probably more than I should on YouTube, and there is great stuff on Lynda and WebJunction, and Lynda is definitely great, but I like Amanda, I find that my first point of entry tends to be YouTube, and just kind of looking around on YouTube for kind of quick answers to tech questions.
Oh, that's wonderful. The State Library subscribes to Lynda. I don't think I knew that. I'll try to find a link to more information about that and send it out with the recording.
And I'll just, we're getting close to 3 now, so I'm just going to go to my last slide here. And so if you want to learn more about the studies that I mentioned, here's a link to a couple articles of mine that came out last year, within the last year, one on First Monday on kind of how ageism shapes tech support for older adults, and then another one on kind of the critical role of public libraries in terms of supporting digital learning among older adults. And so these are both open access journals, so if you want to dive deeper, those are great entry points. And I'm really glad that you all came out for this presentation. It means a lot to me to hear from you all about what you all are doing, and it's wonderful to make connections with folks throughout the state. Yeah, that's all that I have. And thanks to Chad for setting this up. And Chad, did you want to say some things about TNT or anything else?
Sure, I'll put one more shameless plug in. Thank you so much, Noah. This was wonderful, and I think brought a good amount of discussion around what's a common issue for all of us. So yeah, you can become a member of TNT if you're not already for $5 a year. We're in the process of revamping our membership system. We'll soon have a site set up with some community features and hopefully a lot of ways to keep going discussion around this kind of thing. And like I said, we're going to be doing a regular series of webinars throughout the year. You can stay tuned to the NCLA listserv for announcements of what'll come next. Our rep plan at this point is for one sometime in March with tips and discussion around implementing Summon at your library, since I know that is a state library provided resource. So thank you, Noah, once again, and thank you everyone for coming. Hopefully this recording turns out well, and I will send a link to it to everyone who attended today. And like I said, I'll try to dig up some confirmation that we all have access to lynda.com also. All right, enjoy your possible snow day, depending on where you are, and we hope to see you in March.
Yeah, and thanks everyone, and goodbye, and hope to see you all in the future.